So if you'd like to, you can follow along. The lesson's going to be in Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 4. So, as you have, if you were here last Sunday or the previous Sundays, or you've been watching some of the videos in the future, you've noticed that we've been in this book looking at some of the ideas of how we can survive by maintaining our integrity. In the few lessons that we did earlier, we're looking at Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, and Daniel, and how that they struggled in an evil nation, a nation that had been ripped out and taken off into captivity. And the very first lesson we learned was this idea of not being conformed to the culture and being adapted, because that's exactly what they wanted to do. King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to take everyone he brought into that nation, the Chaldeans, and make them Chaldean, make them fit in. Their dietary, their worship, their gods, their food, everything. And these young men had the moral courage to stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that. Then we saw where, the idea that the men, the young boys being thrown into the fiery pit, and this idea again, over and over, we see not going to submit, not going to bow down and worship something that is not right, and how important it is that we as well have little things that are forcing us to bow down to. And sometimes it's as simple as somebody's personal pronouns, that you better address me with my personal pronoun, or you're a hater. And that's a little way, it's not as obvious. I wish it kind of was, where some king, and put up this big statue and said, you got to bow down before it and worship it. Then I could very clearly say, oh, well, that's obvious. I'm not bowing down to that. But it's societal concepts that through generations we've been bowing down to. All this immorality. But we need and we can see the severe consequences that these young men faced. But yet, what was common? They were victorious, and God was with them, and God delivered them. So why are we different? Well, Ron, that was over 3,000 years ago, and so, that's just a Bible story, and there's some reason they were better than me. No. God didn't write the Bible so that you could feel enamored by all these great people that came before. Say, wow, it's not some Western, John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood, that none of us will ever be able to ride a horse like them or shoot the bad guy. I mean, it's all fake. No, it's the opposite. He shows us this to get us to understand that you're just like them. We idolize them, and we put them up in a way that we shouldn't. Look at Joseph over and over, Isaac, Jacob. Oh, man, they're messed up. David, they're just like us. And that's what's important. And so their ability to overcome evil in a very wicked society and God being with them is the same for us. But we have to have the faith. We have to have the trust in God that we can stand and that we will be victorious. With or without you, God's going to win, okay? He wants you to be with Him. He wants you to have faith in Him. But ultimately, always rest assured, He always wins. That's a very common theme. He has the power and He has the will, He has the desire, and He's going to do it, and it always happens. Now, we have to trust then. And so those were very personal lessons. And another one, the last one we looked at last Sunday, is how Daniel, he grew in reputation, he was being blessed, and how God had favored him, and the king even admired him, but everybody else hated him. They were jealous, and they turned on him, and they put the king in a position where he couldn't get out of it, and they tricked him into saying, make a declaration to where nobody for 30 days can pray to anybody, no God, no man, except for you. They knew they could trap him. Remember what they said? They said the only way we can get this guy, because he is honestly innocent, is to get him through his religion. Sound familiar? How are they trying to get us as Christians in this country? Through our religion. That's why I think these lessons are so important. is to look at that. And of course Daniel didn't. And then all of a sudden the king's in a bad position. He's like, oh no, come on, okay. And he grieved. He didn't sleep good that night when they threw him in and sealed him with those lions. And they opened it up in the morning. And he's joyful. Now, the lesson there, sometimes even those who care about you are not going to stand up for you. He's the king. But he's a Mede and a Persian, and they don't do that. Once they write a decree, they can't, it's like, come on, you're the king. So sometimes, but you know what, again, what do we see? God was faithful, and he delivered him. So now, we come to look at those kings. So let's just kind of say, these are the citizens, okay? That's us. And now, let's shift. Because now Daniel is going to now discuss the kings, the rulers. And like I said, it's not chronological the way he wrote this book. But the way he wrote it, it has those correlations between them in the different chapters. Second half of the book is very complicated. It gets off into some very deep, beautiful prophetic language. But before he goes there, one of the things he does is he brings us these very plain truths. So now we meet and we come into this very personal chapter. Now, chapter 4 is amazing. You know why? Because it's written by Nebuchadnezzar himself. Look at it. Look at verse 1. He is the one who writes this. And he's writing to all the people. This is an after the story writing. Daniel took this writing from the king and put it in his book. So these are from his mouth. Now, some of the historians have said, well, this is just something that Daniel kind of put together or something. There's no real proof. This is the story where he loses his mind. And, we'll see where it describes he goes off and like a lion and an animal eating grass like a cow and all this stuff. And historians go, wow, that's just hyperbole. That would never happen. And you know what's interesting is there's a cuneiform. Those little cuneiform, look like little bitty pieces of bread that, you've had in your refrigerator too long, turned to a brick. And they wrote on them history. And archaeologists have dug those up and they're finding them. They're like popping up. I think it's interesting. I think God's like popping them up and showing them, look, this is truth. And we've already talked about one of them that helped to support the historical point of view that Daniel is doing. But there's one in there. Now, it doesn't come in there and say that Nebuchadnezzar went off like a wild man and all this. But what the cuneiform does support is something in his behavior changed. And he stopped ruling the way he normally ruled. And some kind of look at that and go, yeah, well, there is, in other words, evidence something psychologically happened with him. So we believe in God. So chapter 4 is what happened that tells us that. So I wanted to share that with you because too often they try to throw it in our faces, and I'm going to throw it back saying there's evidence in it. You think that the historian who's ruling under the king is going to write something embarrassing about him on a cuneiform? No. That he went off and behaved, but it's interesting that he wrote that the king stopped interacting and ruling the way he normally does, and there's something changed for a period of time. But this is king writing. Verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar, to all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures for generation to generation. Man, that sounds like one of God's prophets, doesn't it? This sounds, if you were to go over and just pop into the minor prophets or one of the other prophets, you would sit there and go, this is just like one. And we saw last time with King Darius almost the same thing. At the end of Daniel being rescued out, that through that king is a proclamation about God. And so remember, this is his personal story. He's writing this. And listen to the way he looks at this. Peace be multiplied to you. And he said, I want to share this. I thought it was a good thing to share this to you. Now let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is Chaldean. His father ruled under the Assyrians. And in that time, they end up breaking away. And so when they broke away, Nebuchadnezzar was a young man. And he ended up serving with his father for a while, doing some battle with the Assyrians. And then he took over and became very successful. He ended up defeating Pharaoh Necho at Carchemish, a decisive battle. His father goes back to Babylon. So they were subjugated to the Assyrians. And so they break away. And Nebuchadnezzar, the son, he takes off and he starts pursuing and he conquests. He beats Tyre. He beats all these different places. Dad dies. And he has to come back. Guess who he brings with him? He brings the first wave of captives. And he takes Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So it's almost because he had to secure his rule. Because he had a brother that was going to usurp him. And he's the firstborn. So he goes flying back to Babylon and takes over. And what's interesting is historians say, we never hear from that brother again. Well, you know what they did back then. So Nebuchadnezzar starts to rule. He started to rule at around age 30. He rules for 43 years. So he rules a huge amount of time. And he starts the building this program in this nation that extended. And one of the things that I think we minimize is the greatness of the Babylonian Empire. We know about Alexander the Great. And everybody's like, wow, Alexander the Great, look all he did and he conquered. I'm sorry, but honestly, Nebuchadnezzar ruled longer, stayed alive longer. He conquered as much territory. He established many things that even Alexander didn't do. He really is exactly like the dream in Daniel 2 when he saw the statue and he interpreted it. And he told Nebuchadnezzar, he goes, you are the head of gold. You are the great empire, the greatest, and none will be even greater than you after that. Now, Cyrus, he's another great one we know of. But what's interesting is the root of their faith. The root of their faith is in the Chaldean gods. So you have Marduk, you have Baal, Ashtaroth, all these other gods. And so that's what we saw, is this wavering back and forth between these kings, to where this very obvious point that these young men who serve Yahweh, their God is the one God, and then they shift. Now, why am I telling you that? It hasn't changed. I'm just telling you, it's just, why did they find out? You find it because of an encounter with God's people, the Hebrew young men, and then they get this epiphany, and God, in a sense, has told these kings, I am God. I am Yahweh. Marduk, all those guys, those gods, they're nothing. And then they go right back. How quickly they forget. And that's what we're going to see in this lesson here because of that. And so, what I love about it is it's Nebuchadnezzar himself telling us this. It's not Daniel on the outside saying, you should have seen what happened to this guy, this king. So, his kingdom, this is a prophetic statement, that very last verse there. His kingdom is everlasting kingdom. Dominion endures generation to generation. That's another part that ties into Daniel's prophecy that said about this kingdom. And so 4 and 5, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. And I saw a dream that made me afraid as I laid in bed. The fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. Now, notice he says in his palace, he's kind of even starting to show, and you're going to see where he's very proud of what he's done. He's accomplished a lot. So he's king. He's lounging around, and all of a sudden he gets this vision. And so we see then he says, so I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me. that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, then the astrologers came in. And I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. What I think is interesting is he goes to them. Notice how he goes right back to it. Now, we're shifting because his opening statement was now he realizes God is God, who he is. But his first inclination is to go to the pagan gods. That's where the root of all of the knowledge of these men who are advising him is from, basically these pagan gods. And then he says, at last, Daniel came in before me, who was named Belshazzar, after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. Now, this is the way a lot of times people that don't have a full understanding will talk sometimes. I'll hear them as I'm talking, and they don't know the Bible real well. They got the concepts, but they don't really say it. For example, said he's the spirit of the gods. It's kind of like, he's right. I mean, he's got the right God, but it's not in that sense. We see he also admits that he renamed him to after his God, but yet there's a conflict because he understands Daniel was named after a part of his root was because of Daniel's God. And so it's interesting. I just thought, why did he bring that up? He could have told the story without ever saying it. It's almost like saying, well, I tried to name him. I named him after my God, but as you listen to this story, you'll figure out, no, it's not the right God. So he tells him the dream. O Belshazzar / Daniel, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you and that no mystery is too difficult for you, tell me the visions of my dream that I saw in their interpretation. You notice, it's interesting. He's the chief, but he's the last one to come. Now, I've heard some say, different reasons, but I think there may be God's hand in this, is to demonstrate to Nebuchadnezzar that the world's wisdom can't answer this. That the only place you're going to find a real answer is going to be from somebody who is with the real powerful God, the real God. And so he let those charmers and sorcerers and magicians go in there and basically say, we can't do this, which embarrassed what? Their gods. And then Daniel comes in and says, so that's what I think I love about it. He goes, I know. See, he knows. Sometimes people, they will acknowledge, I know that you're a good man. I know you're a good Christian woman. I know God is blessing you. But like we saw in the last story, it doesn't mean that they're going to always act and behave that way. I understand that. So he goes and he tells him, and I just started, and a tree, he says, I saw a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong, and its top reached the heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all the flesh was fed from it. I saw in the visions of my head as I laid in the bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud, and he said, thus, chop down the tree, lop off its branches, strip the leaves, and scatter its fruit, let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, and bound with a band of iron and bronze on its and amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let this portion be with the beast in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let the beast's mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. So why the dream? So just back up. You have this amazing picture, this incredible tree As he says, it just shoots up, goes all the way up to the highest heights, and you can see it from all the known places of the earth. Everybody can see it. That's the influence that it has. And this dream, the Holy Watcher who's bringing this message tells him exactly what this is all about. What is the lesson? That the living may know. Now, there's a personal part that he's going to learn, but one of the other greater lessons about this humiliation that's going to occur to him is that everyone around can see this as well. And what is it that he wants them to know? The Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he wills and sets over it the lowliest of men, the humble. So he can't understand that. He's still struggling with that. And so Daniel does respond. He said, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, Belshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make it known to me, the interpretation. But you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. You notice this is Nebuchadnezzar talking. So he still keeps saying, then Daniel, his Hebrew name, and then he comes back, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts were alarmed. And then the king said to Belshazzar, let not the dream nor the interpretation alarm you. Belshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. So he says he can watch Daniel's response. And Daniel already knows what the answer is. And just like any person of power that you're working for, do they want the good news? So Daniel, in his, he understands, he's like, this is a narcissist, kind of ruler. It's all about me and all I've accomplished. And now he's fixing to tell him. And so he's a little alarmed. But it's not just that. It's not just the fear of the king himself. Look what he says at the last statement. This dream is something that can be capitalized by your enemies. This is something that he's kind of concerned that's going to happen to you, and that it could be used against you. And so Daniel interprets it in 22. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to the heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. He's telling him, look, I hope you'll listen to me, but you need to change. Notice he's talking about some things that are going on. There are some iniquities, some things that are happening that are corrupt, immoral, and also the idea of the oppressed, the government, of what they're doing is oppressing the people and causing more harm to them. And so we jump down, if you go on down to 28, and this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 12 months. So a year later, at the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king answered and he said, is not this great Babylon, which I have built with my own mighty power as a royal residence and the glory of my majesty? And while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you until you know the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox. And his body was wet with the dew of the heaven till his hair grew long as eagles and feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. So, a year goes by. What did Daniel tell him? Daniel said, that tree is you. And all this message is because you need to change. You need to repent. And a year goes by, and then all of a sudden you see that it's fulfilled, and he's gloating. He's sitting there looking among all that he's accomplished. And what does he see? He sees all these glorious things that he has done, right? And then so Nebuchadnezzar, at the end of the days, the period that reaches a point, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, as he does according to his will among the host of heaven, among the inhabitants of the earth. None can say his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom and my majesty, splendor returned to me. My counselors, my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. So what do we see? We see God identifying and seeing this. But what did it take? Well, it goes back to the basic message is pride is something that will come every time before the fall. And so one of the greatest dangers for leaders, or even anyone who's in power, honestly, in whether it's a supervisory role at a job site, we see this all the time in little ways, don't we? Where people all of a sudden get a little bit of power, and all of a sudden they're like puffed up. They stop listening to people. I've seen that time and time again, where people, they start distancing. We're talking nationally, okay? Because God, that's what he's trying to show us today, this morning. And this lesson is kind of to take a step back and look and put into perspective all the nations that are in existence today and understand God is still in charge. God is the one who is going to raise them up. And that's one of the things in saying, my kingdom is great. It's not really yours, you see. It's not yours. Everything is under God's sovereignty, under his power. And that type of pride and arrogance in a leader is going to bring them down. Now, I know some dictators that seem to rule a long time. Gaddafi from Libya is one that I thought, wow, that guy's been going on like the Timex watch. I know some of you may not even know him anymore. He's gone. Idi Amin. Anybody remember Idi Amin? I see a few heads nodding. Look him up. Not right now, but Google him. They said he was a cannibal. I mean, you could go through history. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, on and on and on. Rome, there's nothing really left of them either. And understanding that as we're looking from the bottom up, and sometimes we look at them and we think, how in the world, Lord, can you keep letting these leaders in these nations control and be so evil? And his answer is, I don't. I hold them accountable. And one of the great messages through the minor prophets is that same thing. When Habakkuk was so disgusted with his people because they were so evil, he was praying to God to come punish his own people. And God said, I'm going to use the Assyrians, and they're going to come in and they're going to punish Israel and take them off. And Habakkuk had a meltdown. Habakkuk goes, whoa, wait a minute. That's a vile, nasty people. And he kind of like reminds God, says, you know how horrible they are. Okay, we're bad. We need to be punished. Maybe throw a famine on us or something. I'm sure that Amos had some idea. Habakkuk had some idea of what he wanted. And God said, no, I'm going to use the Assyrians. And you know what else he told him whenever he responded like that? He said, and don't worry about it, because when the Assyrians start to become proud I'm going to take them out. And did you know historically that's exactly what happened? It's written. It's another archaeological fact. Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, came in, invaded, took off Israel like Habakkuk wanted. But then in his pride, he boasted of how he had killed all the gods of the conquering nation. He killed all their gods. And so he pursues into Judah. And he comes into Jerusalem and he sends forward a messenger. And the messenger proclaims to him and says, look, my king has killed all the gods of all the nations that he's conquered. And he's here to kill yours. You know what happened that night? The angel of the Lord came and killed 185,000 Assyrians. And even the king writes about his conquest, and you can look this up, about how he had this mighty victories as he marched through and destroyed all these nations. And then he put King Hezekiah, he mentions him by name, like a bird in a cage. And then he goes home. Whoa, wait a minute. What happened there? Aren't you leaving a little narrative out here? Why didn't you destroy him? Because he lost his army. And he couldn't go any further. And he didn't just go back home. When he got back home, guess what happened to him? While he was in his false god temple, his own son came in and killed him. And Habakkuk is, so we're like that, are we not? We look at our country and we look at our leaders and go, Lord, how long can you keep doing this? Are you awake? What's going on? And we say, we want justice. Do you really? Do you really? Or would you be like Habakkuk? And when God, if he gave you the answer, what he was going to do to this nation, would you go, whoa, wait a minute, it's not that bad? Seriously. What if God's plan was to destroy America and punish us? Would you sign up for that? I would have struggled wanting that to happen because I kind of like my life, here. I do have some. But the point, again, it's not up to you. It's not up to the leaders unless they make bad decisions and they start becoming arrogant the way Nebuchadnezzar. But man, we want to tell God. We think that God needs to get active. We try to get involved in all this stuff. And so, we need to remember exactly what proverb writer said in Proverbs. He said, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. It is better to be of a lowly spirit. Remember one of the messages he said? I want the living to understand that God puts people in power and that it's the lowly, the humble. And those who become proud, he'll take care of them. It is better to be of lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. The other great lesson is God's sovereignty. Never, never, never forget it. This entire existence of this world has been, will be, continually, it's God's. Man may think he's building some great nation and doing these great things, but we know that it's God. This is exactly, what we see. You need to know that it's God who rules. We need to understand it. That's what Paul said in Athens to the most intellectual of the world of his day. He started out by saying that God made all men from one blood. And it's God who established the boundaries. If you go to Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, that's where God did it. Moses in his song talks about that. How God is the one who set forward and divided up and set them up. And he's the one that's in charge of them. It's not them themselves and somehow their great personality or power. But it's God that's allowing these things to happen. And that's what Deuteronomy, here it is. I actually have it here. Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders. That's what Paul is quoting in Acts and showing the fact that God is still the one that is establishing it. It's hard, though, for us at our level to not, look around and see all these terrible leaders around the world and in our own country, whether it's in the government, at the mayor's level, or wherever it might be. It's something very difficult for us to understand and let go of it. And that's something that, you see it was at the end of this that it took him time to be humbled and driven out. But once he did, we see that through God's mercy, he restored him. He restored him. And that's what he says in verse 36. He says, at the same time, when my reason returned to me, for the glory of my kingdom, my honor, the splendor returned to me, he said, everything came back. So even the worst leader that you're ready to give up on, that you think is the most horrible person to ever lead anything, your nation, you can't get much worse than Nebuchadnezzar. But you turn around and you look, and this guy went back, and God not only gave him back everything, but he restored him, and he said he even continued to prosper. Now, kind of the sad part is he lived only a few years, maybe they say 10 years, 5 to 10 years after this, but he ruled 43 years. And so there's, sometimes we look at leaders even that we cannot stand, that we're like, we want them to just get rid of them. And we got to understand that, maybe there's a purpose. Maybe there's a purpose in here. And that God's going to deal with it. And that we got to start learning how to trust him. And just remember that greater lesson, that even the rulers, no matter where they're at in history, in the past, present, and future, the same God is going to control them. And at the end of the day, his will is going to be determined, and it's going to be victorious. They're great lessons. Next week, we got some more. We're going to look again at some lessons. And the sad part is, some of them, again, they don't learn. But God's love and mercy is always trying to even work with them. And so we need to let God do his job and not try to get involved sometimes. And that's the same way he acts with us in our level. No matter how stubborn we are sometimes and we fight against him, he is still ready to receive us. Sometimes it takes some humility, doesn't it? It takes some humbling in life to kick you down before you finally realize, you know what? There's only one true God. And that's the very personal lesson as we wrap this all up and we think about it, is your relationship with him. Is pride stopping you from serving him the way you should? Is pride something that may keep you away from becoming one of his children and becoming a Christian? Because we know very clearly pride is the very thing that you experience just before what? Calamity. And if you've lived a minute, you've experienced it in some way, huh? But you can't afford to do that with God. We can't. We can't afford to let our pride separate us from our Father. He has done everything he can. But now it's your turn. It's our turn to think about it. So as we look at this lesson, I hope you've learned something, encouraged you in your life as we live through the difficult times we may think we're going through compared to other times or whatever it is. But put your trust in him. If we can help you this morning with your relationship with him, I hope that you'll take this moment while we're singing this song. And if you're comfortable, come forward. Talk to us, and let us pray with you or help you establish a relationship with him the way God wants. So think about this while we stand and sing.